The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, with a sound that echoed through the concrete hallway. James walked slowly, his hands cuffed in front of him, following the corrections officer down the long corridor. The orange jumpsuit they'd given him was 2 sizes too big, hanging loose on his lean frame. At 42 years old, with gray streaks running through his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes, he looked tired, worn down, like someone who'd already been through too much in life. The officer stopped at a door marked C Block and punched in a code. "This is you," he said flatly, not bothering to make eye contact. "Keep your head down, follow the rules, and you'll be fine." The door buzzed open and James stepped into the general population area of the county jail. The noise hit him first. Dozens of voices talking, laughing, shouting. Metal doors clanging. Footsteps echoing off the bare walls. The smell was next. A mixture of industrial cleaner, sweat, and something else he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't as bad as some places he'd been, but it wasn't home either. He walked past rows of cells, feeling eyes on him from every direction. New arrivals always got attention. It was just the way things worked in places like this. Some of the men were curious. Others were sizing him up, looking for weakness, trying to figure out if he'd be a problem or an opportunity. Near the back of the block, a group of men sat around a table playing cards. They weren't just any group, James could tell that right away. They moved differently, carried themselves with a certain confidence that came from owning the space around them. Prison gangs weren't hard to spot if you knew what to look for. The tattoos covering their arms and necks told stories. The way other inmates gave them a wide berth told another. One man in particular stood out. He was in his mid-30s, built like someone who'd spent years turning his body into a weapon through endless push-ups and pull-ups. His arms were covered in ink, symbols, names, territorial marks. A thick scar ran down the left side of his face from his temple to his jawline. The others called him Razor, and it was clear he was in charge. Razor watched James walk past, his eyes tracking every movement. He leaned back in his chair and said something to the men around him. They all turned to look. One of them laughed. Another cracked his knuckles. The officer led James to a cell on the second tier. "Top bunk is yours," he said, unlocking the cuffs. "Your cellmate's at work detail right now. Dinner's at 5. Don't start anything. Don't join anything, and you might make it out of here without too much trouble." Then he was gone, leaving James alone in the small concrete room. James looked around his new home. 2 metal bunks bolted to the wall, a steel toilet and sink combo in the corner, a tiny metal desk. No privacy, no space, no comfort. He'd been in worse conditions before, but that didn't make this any easier. He placed his thin mattress on the top bunk and sat down, the metal frame creaking under his weight. Through the bars of his cell, he could see down into the common area. Razor and his crew were still at their table, but now they were looking up in his direction, pointing, talking, planning something, most likely. James had seen this pattern before. Different place, different faces, but the same basic human dynamics. Establish dominance. Control the weak. Create a hierarchy through intimidation. He lay back on the bunk and closed his eyes. The arrest had been 3 days ago. The bar fight that landed him here had been quick and brutal, but necessary. He'd been having a quiet drink after work when he'd heard screaming from the parking lot. A woman was being dragged toward a car by 3 men. She was fighting, trying to get away, but they were too strong. James hadn't thought about it. He'd just acted. Years of training had kicked in automatically. By the time it was over, all 3 men were on the ground. 2 had broken bones. 1 had a concussion. The woman was safe, but the men pressed charges. Self-defense, his lawyer had said. Clear case of it. The security cameras would prove everything. But until the court date, he had to wait here. The afternoon passed slowly. James stayed in his cell, staying quiet, staying out of the way. His cellmate returned around 4. A younger guy, maybe 25, who'd been picked up for drug possession. He seemed nervous when he saw James, probably worried about what kind of person he'd be stuck living with. "I'm not looking for any trouble," James said simply. "I'll stay out of your way if you stay out of mine." The younger man nodded, relieved. "Works for me, man. Just keep your stuff on your side and we're good." At 5 o'clock, the doors buzzed open for dinner. Inmates filed out of their cells and down to the cafeteria on the first floor. James joined the line, grabbed a tray and let the workers slop food onto it without complaint. Mystery meat, watery vegetables, a roll that could double as a weapon if thrown hard enough. He'd eaten worse. He looked for an empty table and spotted one in the corner. But as he started walking toward it, two men from Razor's crew stepped into his path. They weren't being subtle about it. One of them grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Oops," he said, and knocked the tray from James's hands. Food splattered across the floor and all over James's orange jumpsuit. Gravy dripped down his chest. Mashed potatoes stuck to his shoes. The cafeteria got quiet for a moment, then erupted in laughter. Dozens of men finding entertainment in the humiliation of the new guy. James stood perfectly still. His face showed nothing. No anger, no embarrassment, no fear. He simply bent down, picked up the tray, and walked back to the serving line. The workers, looking uncomfortable, gave him a new meal without comment. He walked to the corner table and sat down alone. His hands didn't shake as he ate. His eyes didn't dart around nervously like other new inmates. He chewed slowly, methodically, as if nothing had happened. To most people, this might have looked like defeat, like acceptance of his place at the bottom of the social order. But Razor, watching from across the room, saw something different, something that bothered him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Most new arrivals would have gotten angry or scared. They would have reacted. This man had done neither. He'd simply adapted and moved on, as if getting food thrown on him was just a minor inconvenience. That kind of calm wasn't normal. It made Razor curious. And in a place like this, curiosity often led to escalation. If someone wouldn't break from embarrassment, you had to push harder. Test them, find their limit. That was how you maintained control. As James finished his meal and returned his tray, Razor made a decision. This new fish in the orange jumpsuit needed to learn his place, and Razor was going to enjoy teaching him. The next morning started at 6. The loud buzz of the cell doors jolted everyone awake. James had already been up for an hour, sitting on his bunk in the darkness, breathing slowly, centering himself. Old habits died hard. In some ways, waking up before dawn felt more normal to him than sleeping in ever had. Breakfast was the same routine as dinner. Line up, get your tray, find a seat. James took his food and headed for the same corner table. This time, nobody knocked his tray away. But as he sat down, one of Razor's crew walked past and accidentally bumped into him hard enough that coffee sloshed out of his cup and onto his hand. The liquid was lukewarm at best, but the message was clear. James wiped his hand on his jumpsuit and kept eating. He could feel eyes on him from across the room. They were waiting for a reaction, waiting for him to get angry, to complain, to show fear. He gave them nothing. Over the next few days, the harassment became routine. They'd knock his belongings off tables when he set them down. They'd cut in front of him in every line: food line, commissary line, phone line. One afternoon in the recreation yard, someone threw a basketball that hit him square in the back. When he turned around, a group of men were laughing, but nobody claimed responsibility. Through it all, James stayed calm. He'd pick up his things without complaint. He'd wait patiently when people cut in front of him. He'd toss the basketball back and walk away. His face never showed emotion. His voice never rose. To anyone watching, he seemed like the perfect victim, someone who'd take abuse without fighting back. But his cellmate noticed something odd. Late at night, when he thought everyone was asleep, James would do exercises. Not normal exercises, strange, controlled movements that looked like some kind of martial arts. Push-ups where he'd pause at the bottom and hold the position for a full minute. Pull-ups on the bunk frame where he'd move so slowly it looked painful. And his breathing never changed. Always steady, always controlled. "You some kind of fighter?" the cellmate asked one night. James was quiet for a moment. "I used to be a lot of things," he finally said. "Now I'm just trying to get through this and go home." On the 5th day, the harassment escalated. James was walking back from the library when 3 gang members blocked his path in the hallway. The corridor was empty, they'd timed it that way. "You got a problem with us, old man?" one of them said, stepping close. "You think you're too good to show respect?" James kept his voice level. "I don't have a problem with anyone. I just want to do my time and leave." "That's not how it works in here," another one said. "You're in our house now. That means you follow our rules. And our rules say new guys pay a tax. Everything you got in commissary belongs to us now." James had $50 on his books that his sister had put there. Enough for soap, toothpaste, a few snacks. Not much, but it was all he had. "I need those things," he said simply. The first man shoved him against the wall. Not hard enough to really hurt, just enough to establish dominance. You need to learn your place. That's what you need. James absorbed the shove without resisting. His eyes met the man's, and for just a second something flickered in them. Something cold and calculating. The gang member felt it. A brief moment of unease, like looking into the eyes of a predator pretending to be prey. But then it was gone, and James was just a quiet middle-aged man in an orange jumpsuit again. "Okay," James said softly. "I'll bring you what I have." The men seemed satisfied. They walked away laughing, congratulating themselves on breaking another inmate. But the one who'd shoved James couldn't quite shake the feeling he'd gotten from that look. He told himself he was imagining things. That afternoon in the yard, Razor himself decided it was time to make things official. He approached James, who was sitting alone on a bench in the sun reading a worn paperback someone had left in the day room. 4 of Razor's crew came with him, fanning out in a semicircle. Other inmates in the yard noticed and moved away. Nobody wanted to be nearby when Razor made a move. The guards in the towers were too far away to hear conversations, and they'd learned not to interfere unless things got violent. "You settling in okay, old-timer?" Razor asked, his voice dripping with false concern. He sat down on the bench next to James, close enough to invade his personal space. James marked his page and looked up. "Well enough," he said. Razor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "See, that's good. That's real good. Because I'd hate for you to have a hard time in here. This place can be dangerous, you know. Accidents happen. People get hurt. Sometimes over stupid things like not showing the right people respect." James was quiet, waiting. "You got nobody in here," Razor continued, his voice getting harder. "No crew, no protection, no friends. In a place like this, that makes you vulnerable. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand," James said. "Good, so here's how it's going to work. You want protection, you work for me. You run little errands, carry messages, do favors when I ask, and maybe nothing bad happens to you. Maybe you make it out of here in one piece when your court date comes up." Razor leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But if you don't want to play ball, if you think you're going to just sit here reading your books and minding your business, then things are going to get real uncomfortable for you real fast. You feeling me?" James closed his book carefully and set it down beside him. He turned to face Razor directly, his expression still calm, still unreadable. "I appreciate the offer," he said quietly, "but I'm going to have to decline. I don't want any trouble. I just want to do my time peacefully." For a moment, nobody moved. The yard got very quiet. Inmates who'd been watching from a distance stopped pretending not to pay attention. Razor's crew exchanged glances, surprised. Nobody said no to Razor, not in here. Not on his block. Razor's face darkened. The fake friendliness vanished. "You think this is a negotiation? You think you got a choice?" He stood up suddenly and grabbed James by the front of his jumpsuit, yanking him to his feet. The book fell to the ground, pages fluttering. "Let me explain something to you, old man. I own this yard. I own this block. That means I own you. And if you don't, let go," James said. His voice was still quiet, but something in it had changed. There was an edge to it now, like steel wrapped in velvet. Razor laughed and shoved James backward. He stumbled a few steps and caught himself against the bench. "Or what? What are you going to do about it?" James straightened up slowly. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but there was something different in the way he stood now. More balanced, more grounded, ready. "I'm asking you nicely," James said. "Please, just leave me alone." The word please hung in the air. To Razor, it sounded like begging, like weakness. He stepped forward, invading James's space again, his finger jabbing toward James's chest. "You don't get it yet, but you will. By the time I'm done with you, you're going to wish you'd said yes when I gave you the chance." James didn't respond. He just stood there, breathing steadily, his eyes never leaving Razor's face. And in that moment, watching this quiet man who refused to be intimidated despite having no apparent way to defend himself, Razor made a decision. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow in the showers, away from the cameras, away from the guards. Tomorrow this old man was going to learn exactly what happened to people who disrespected him. He turned and walked away, his crew following. As they left, one of them kicked James's book, sending it skidding across the concrete yard. James watched them go. Then he walked over, picked up his book, brushed off the dust, and sat back down to read. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. But inside, somewhere deep down where nobody could see, he was already preparing for what was coming. 2 weeks had passed since James first arrived. The harassment had continued daily, but he'd endured it all with the same quiet patience. He never complained, never retaliated, never showed fear. To Razor and his crew, this made him either the weakest man in the block or the dumbest. Either way, they decided it was time to make their point clear. The showers were on the ground floor, away from most of the cells. They had cameras, but there were blind spots if you knew where to stand. The guards checked them every 15 minutes during the scheduled shower times, but that left plenty of opportunity for things to happen. It was a Tuesday afternoon. James grabbed his towel and soap, same as always. His cellmate had warned him that morning. "Man, I heard some things. Maybe skip the shower today. Use the sink in the cell." James had just shook his head. "I appreciate the heads up, but I can't spend the next few months avoiding showers. Whatever's going to happen, might as well get it over with." The cellmate had looked at him like he was crazy. Maybe he was right. The shower room was tiled in faded white with rust stains running down from the pipes. 6 shower heads lined each wall, and the floor was always wet and slippery. James walked in and found it empty. Too empty. Usually there were at least a few other guys around. He should have turned around right then. But he was tired. Tired of being pushed around. Tired of looking over his shoulder. Tired of eating cold food and wearing dirty clothes because he was trying to avoid confrontation. Sometimes you just got tired of running. He hung his towel on a hook, turned on the water, and stepped under the spray. The water was barely warm, but it felt good to wash away the sweat and grime. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let himself relax. That's when he heard the footsteps. 6 of them walked in. James recognized them all from Razor's crew. They spread out, blocking both exits. Nobody said anything at first. They just stood there, letting the tension build. James turned off the water and reached for his towel, but one of them kicked it away. It slid across the wet floor and bunched up against the wall. "Going somewhere, old man?" the biggest one said. He was holding something in his hand, a sharpened piece of plastic. Not big enough to kill someone, but plenty big enough to hurt them badly. In prison, guys made weapons out of anything. Toothbrushes, combs, pieces of broken plastic, anything with an edge. James stood there dripping wet, wearing nothing but his boxers. 6 against 1, all of them younger, most of them bigger, armed. And they'd chosen their moment perfectly. No cameras could see them. And the guards wouldn't come by for at least 10 minutes. "I don't want trouble," James said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Too late for that," another one said. "Razor gave us a job. Make sure you understand how things work around here. Make sure you remember it every time you look in a mirror." The one with the weapon moved first, lunging forward with the sharpened plastic aimed at James's shoulder. Not to kill, just to hurt, to scar, to send a message. But James wasn't there anymore. He'd moved sideways in a blur of motion, faster than any of them expected. His hand shot out and grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting it at an angle that made the weapon drop instantly. Before anyone could react, James stepped inside the man's guard and drove his elbow into his solar plexus. The attacker went down hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The other 5 froze for a split second, confused by what they'd just seen. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The old man was supposed to curl up and take his beating. He wasn't supposed to move like that. The second attacker charged in, throwing wild punches. James deflected the first one with his forearm, ducked under the second, and swept the man's legs out from under him. The attacker's head hit the wet tile with a sickening crack. He didn't get up. Now the others realized they had a real problem. This wasn't some scared civilian. This was something else entirely. 3 of them rushed him at once, trying to use their numbers. James moved through them like water flowing around rocks. Every movement was efficient, precise, controlled. No wasted energy, no wild swinging, just pure technique honed over years of training most people couldn't imagine. He redirected one man's momentum into the wall. Caught another with a knee strike that folded him in half. The third got close enough to grab James's arm. But James twisted free and delivered a palm strike to the man's chin that sent him sprawling backward into the showers. The last 2 were backing up now, looking at each other, trying to decide if they should keep going or run. James stood in the center of the shower room, breathing steady, water still dripping from his hair. He had barely broken a sweat. "Leave," he said quietly. "Just leave." But before they could make that choice, Razor himself walked through the door. He'd been waiting outside, listening, expecting to hear James crying or begging. Instead, he'd heard sounds of a fight, but the wrong people seemed to be getting hurt. He looked around the shower room. 4 of his men were on the ground groaning. 2 were backing away from a middle-aged man in wet boxers who looked like he'd barely been in a fight at all. "What is this?" Razor demanded, his voice echoing off the tiles. He couldn't process what he was seeing. It didn't make sense. James turned to face him. "I asked you to leave me alone. I asked all of you. I didn't want this." Razor's face twisted with rage. Nobody embarrassed him like this. Nobody beat his crew. His reputation was everything in here, and this old man was making him look weak. He pulled out his own weapon, a longer piece of sharpened metal he'd been carrying for months, waiting for the right moment to use it. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Razor said, advancing toward James. The 2 remaining crew members moved to flank him. 3 on 1 now, and Razor was the most dangerous fighter in the whole cell block. Everyone knew it. He'd put more than a dozen men in the prison hospital over the years. James raised his hands, palms out. "Don't do this. You don't understand." "I understand plenty," Razor snarled. He feinted left, then came in fast from the right. The sharpened metal aimed at James's ribs. What happened next happened so fast that later, when people talked about it, they couldn't quite agree on the details. James moved in a way that seemed impossible. He caught Razor's wrist mid-strike, twisted, and the weapon went flying. Then his other hand came up in a strike to Razor's throat. Not hard enough to crush his windpipe, but hard enough to make him understand that James could have if he'd wanted to. Razor stumbled backward, clutching his throat, eyes wide with shock and fear. The 2 remaining crew members rushed James from both sides. He dropped low, sweeping one man's legs while using his other hand to redirect the second man's momentum. They collided with each other and went down in a tangle of limbs, and then it was over. All 6 attackers were on the ground. Razor was leaning against the wall, still holding his throat, looking at James like he was seeing a ghost. James stood in the center of the room, water pooling around his feet. His hands were shaking slightly now, not from fear but from adrenaline, from the effort it had taken to hold back, to use only enough force to stop them without seriously injuring anyone. "I'm not your enemy," James said, his voice tight with emotion. "I never was. I just wanted to be left alone. I spent years fighting, real fighting, against people who wanted to kill me and everyone I cared about. I came home from that. I don't want to fight anymore. I just want peace." He walked over to his towel, picked it up, and wrapped it around his waist. His hands were steadier now. He looked at Razor one more time. "I could have hurt you, all of you, badly, but I didn't because that's not who I am anymore. I'm asking you one last time, please just leave me alone." Then he walked out of the shower room, leaving 6 gang members sitting in shock, trying to understand what had just happened to them. Word spread through the block within an hour. The stories got bigger with each telling, but the core truth remained. The quiet man in orange wasn't what he seemed. And Razor's crew had learned that the hard way. The guards found them 20 minutes later. 6 men sitting on the shower room floor, nursing injuries and bruised egos. When the sergeant asked what happened, every single one of them said the same thing. "We slipped." The floor was wet, nobody talked, not even to save themselves from disciplinary action, because talking meant admitting that one middle-aged man had taken down 6 of them without breaking a sweat. That kind of story would make them a joke. Better to take the write-up and keep their mouths shut. But silence only works if everyone keeps quiet. And in prison, news travels faster than wildfire. By dinner that evening, half the block had heard some version of what happened. A guy in the showers took on Razor's whole crew. An old man turned out to be some kind of fighter. The quiet guy in C Block wasn't what he seemed. The stories got bigger with each telling, but they all pointed to the same conclusion. James was dangerous. The warden's office launched an investigation the next morning. When 6 inmates end up injured at the same time in the same place, questions get asked. They pulled James from his cell and sat him down in a small interview room. The walls were cinder block painted institutional beige. A camera watched from the corner. "Want to tell me what happened yesterday?" Lieutenant Davis asked. He was a 20-year veteran of corrections, a big man with gray hair and tired eyes who'd seen every con and hustle in the book. "I took a shower," James said calmly. "When I came out, there were some men on the floor. I reported it to the guard on duty. 6 men, all of them from the same gang. All of them injured. And you just happened to be there?" "I was taking a shower," James repeated. Davis studied him for a long moment. "You know what I think? I think those boys tried to jump you and it didn't go the way they planned. I think you defended yourself. But here's my problem. If I can't prove what happened, I can't protect you from retaliation. I don't need protection, James said quietly. Everyone needs protection in here, son. Even the tough guys. Davis pulled out a file folder and opened it. See, I got curious about you. Did a little digging. Found out some interesting things. He slid a paper across the table. It was James's military service record. The parts that weren't classified anyway. Army Special Forces. 3 combat deployments. Multiple commendations. Silver Star for valor. Davis looked up from the paper. You're a Green Beret. James didn't respond. He just sat there, his face blank. These gang members, Davis continued, they had no idea who they were messing with, did they? They saw a quiet middle-aged guy and thought he'd be easy prey. They didn't know they were poking a trained soldier. Former soldier, James corrected. I'm not that person anymore. Maybe, but that training doesn't just go away. Davis closed the folder. Look, I'm not going to press this. Those boys aren't talking, and I got no evidence of what really happened. But word's going to spread. People are going to know what you are. That changes things. I just want to do my time quietly and go home, James said. Too late for that now, Davis replied. He was right. By the time James got back to his cell, the whole dynamic had shifted. When he walked through the common area, conversations stopped. Men looked at him differently, some with respect, some with fear, some with curiosity, but nobody looked at him like he was weak anymore. His cellmate was practically bouncing with nervous energy when James got back. Dude, is it true? Are you really like a Special Forces guy? Did you really take down 6 dudes in the shower? It wasn't like that, James said. But you did fight them? And you won? James sat on his bunk and rubbed his face. I defended myself. That's all. I didn't want to fight. They didn't give me a choice, man, that's crazy. Everyone's talking about it. Razor's crew is embarrassed. They're trying to act like nothing happened, but everyone knows. And there's other guys who want to. Want to what? James asked, talk to you. Veterans mostly. There's a few guys in here who served. They want to meet you. That afternoon in the yard, 3 men approached James while he was sitting on his usual bench. They didn't look threatening. Just cautious, respectful. The oldest one spoke first. He was maybe 50, with tattoos that showed Marine Corps insignia. Mind if we sit? James gestured to the empty space on the bench. Name's Rodriguez. Did 2 tours in Iraq, Marines. He nodded to the others. This is Thompson, Army Infantry. And Wilson, Navy. James, he said simply. We heard you were Special Forces, Rodriguez said. Wanted to say welcome, I guess. There's not many of us in here, but we look out for each other. You need anything, you let us know. James was quiet for a moment. I appreciate that. But I'm not looking to join anything or start anything. I just want to keep my head down. We get that, Thompson said. But sometimes keeping your head down isn't an option. Not in a place like this. What you did yesterday, whether you wanted to or not, that bought you respect. That's valuable currency in here. I don't want respect, James said. I want to be left alone. Wilson leaned forward. With all due respect, brother, you made a choice when you didn't let them hurt you. You showed these guys that some people can't be pushed around. That matters. Whether you like it or not, you're somebody now. Over the next few days, James noticed the change everywhere. The gang members who used to harass him now gave him space. Other inmates nodded to him in the hallways. Guards treated him differently, not better or worse, just differently. Like they understood something about him they hadn't before. Razor kept his distance. He'd moved to a different table in the cafeteria. When they crossed paths, he'd nod slightly. Not friendly, but not hostile either. Just acknowledgement. An unspoken truce. He'd learned a lesson that day in the showers. Some prey is actually a predator in disguise. But the biggest change came from the prison administration itself. The warden called James into his office on Friday morning. The warden was a stern woman named Patterson, who'd run the facility for 8 years. She didn't tolerate nonsense from inmates or staff. Sit, she said, pointing to a chair. James sat. I've reviewed your file, Patterson said. All of it. The military service. The incident that brought you here. The security footage from that bar parking lot. James waited. You were defending a woman who was being assaulted. 3 men attacked you with weapons, and you disabled them without using excessive force. Every legal expert who's looked at this says it's textbook self-defense. She leaned forward. The prosecutor knows it too. They're dropping the charges. James felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or relief. When? Court hearing is Monday. Paperwork should be finalized by Tuesday. You'll be released Wednesday morning. She paused. What happened in the showers off the record, I'm glad you can defend yourself. But I'm also glad you showed restraint. You could have hurt those men badly. You chose not to. I've hurt enough people for one lifetime, James said quietly. I don't want to hurt anyone else unless I absolutely have to. Patterson nodded. You're a good man who got dealt a bad hand. Come Monday, you'll be going home. Until then, we'll keep you safe. No more incidents. She was true to her word. James was moved to a single cell in a quieter section of the jail. The guards checked on him regularly. The veterans continued to sit with him at meals, and their presence alone kept trouble away. Even Razor's crew stayed clear. On Sunday evening, James packed the few belongings he'd accumulated. His cellmate, who'd been moved with him, watched with mixed feelings. Man, I'm happy for you. But also kind of jealous, you know? Your time will come, James said. Keep your head down. Stay out of trouble. You'll get out of here. Thanks. And hey, thanks for not being a jerk about all this. Some guys, they get respect and it goes to their head. You just stayed you, James smiled slightly. It was maybe the first genuine smile anyone in the facility had seen from him. That's all I ever wanted to be. Monday morning came. James put on the clothes he'd been arrested in, now cleaned and pressed. He walked through the jail one last time, escorted by Lieutenant Davis. Other inmates watched him go. Some called out good wishes. The veterans all nodded in respect. As they reached the final checkpoint, Davis said, You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't known how to fight? If they'd gotten what they wanted in those showers? James was quiet for a moment. I try not to think about that. I'd rather think about what happens next. Going home, seeing my family, living a normal life. You earned it, Davis said, unlocking the last door. Good luck out there. James stepped through into the processing area. Freedom was just one courtroom away. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky and the promise of rain. James was up before dawn like always. He sat on his bunk in the single cell they'd moved him to, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks. It felt like a lifetime compressed into days. The court hearing was at 10. A guard came to collect him at 9, escorting him through corridors he'd walked dozens of times. But this time felt different. This time he was walking toward freedom instead of deeper into the system. They loaded him into a transport van along with 3 other inmates who had court appearances. None of them spoke during the 20-minute drive to the courthouse. James watched the city pass by through the reinforced windows. Normal people going about their normal lives. Walking dogs, drinking coffee, heading to work, things he'd taken for granted before. At the courthouse, they processed him through security and put him in a holding cell to wait. His public defender showed up 15 minutes before the hearing, a tired-looking woman named Chen who carried a briefcase that had seen better days. Good news, she said, pulling out papers. The prosecutor reviewed all the security footage from the bar. Multiple angles. It clearly shows you were trying to leave when those 3 men blocked your exit. Shows them pulling weapons first. Shows you only using enough force to stop them. It's textbook self-defense, so I'm going home? James asked. You're going home. The prosecutor is dropping all charges. Judge just needs to sign off on it, but that's a formality. You'll be a free man by lunch, she paused. I heard about what happened at the jail. The incident in the showers. James said nothing. Off the record, she continued. I'm glad you knew how to protect yourself, but I'm also glad you're getting out before things could escalate further. Men with your skill set, sometimes the system doesn't know what to do with them. The hearing itself took less than 10 minutes. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to the prosecutor's motion to dismiss, and banged his gavel. Charges dismissed. Mr. James, you're free to go. And let me say, thank you for your service to our country. Just like that, it was over. They took him back to the jail to collect his property and complete the release paperwork. It took another 2 hours of bureaucratic processing, signing forms, getting back his wallet and keys, changing out of the orange jumpsuit for the last time. Lieutenant Davis was there to oversee his release. Glad to see you getting out, he said. You did your best to avoid trouble in there. That says a lot about your character. I just wanted to survive it, James replied. You did more than survive. You taught some people a lesson they needed to learn. Davis handed him a card. This is for a veteran support group. Meets every Thursday evening. Good people. They help guys transition back to civilian life. You might want to check it out. James took the card and nodded. Thanks for everything. As he walked toward the final exit, he heard his name called. He turned to see Rodriguez, the Marine veteran, being brought back from court. They made eye contact through the wire mesh that separated the secure area from the exit corridor. Stay strong out there, brother, Rodriguez called out. Don't forget about us. I won't, James promised. Then he stepped through the door into the free world. The air outside felt different, cleaner somehow. Or maybe that was just his imagination. His sister was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car. When she saw him, she ran over and hugged him tight. I knew they'd drop the charges, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. I knew it. You were just helping that woman. Anyone who saw that video could see it. It's over now, James said. I just want to go home. The drive back to his apartment took 30 minutes. His sister talked the whole time, filling him in on everything he'd missed. Their mom was doing better after her surgery. His nephew had made the soccer team. Life had continued on while he'd been locked away. At his apartment building, she helped him carry up the groceries she'd bought. I stocked your fridge, got your mail, watered your plants, though I think that one in the kitchen might be dead. Sorry. It was dying before I left, James said with a small smile. Not your fault. After she left, promising to check on him tomorrow, James stood in the middle of his living room. His home, his space. No bars, no guards, no watching eyes. Just silence and freedom. He took a long, hot shower, the first truly private one he'd had in weeks. Put on clean clothes that were actually his. Made a sandwich with fresh bread and real meat, small things that felt impossibly luxurious. That evening, he sat on his couch and turned on the TV. Regular programs, news, weather, nothing important, everything normal. Exactly what he'd wanted, but his mind kept going back to the jail. To the men still in there. To Rodriguez and Thompson and Wilson, the veterans who'd reached out to him. To his former cellmate who still had months to go, even to Razor in a strange way. That confrontation in the showers had taught them both something. Razor learned that some people can't be intimidated. James learned that sometimes, no matter how much you want peace, you have to stand up for yourself. Over the next few days, James fell back into his routine. He went to his job at the warehouse. They'd held his position, thankfully. Caught up with friends, visited his family, tried to pretend the past 3 weeks hadn't happened, but they had happened, and they'd changed him just a little. Made him realize that running from his past, from who he used to be, from the skills he'd learned, wasn't the answer. He didn't have to be a soldier anymore, but he didn't have to pretend he'd never been one either. Thursday evening, he pulled out the card Lieutenant Davis had given him. The Veterans Support Group. He'd told himself he didn't need it. He was fine. He could handle things on his own. That's what he'd always done. But maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe always handling things alone was why he'd ended up in that bar fight in the first place, why he'd spent 3 weeks in jail trying to be invisible instead of accepting help from the other veterans sooner. The meeting was at a community center across town. When James walked in, there were about 15 people sitting in a circle. Different ages, different branches of service, different stories, but all connected by that common thread of having served and trying to figure out what came after. An older man with a white beard gestured to an empty chair. New face, welcome. I'm Bill. Army retired. This is a judgment-free zone. You share what you want when you want. Or just listen. Whatever helps, James sat down. I'm James, Army, and I just got out of jail yesterday. A few people looked surprised, but nobody judged. One woman nodded knowingly. Been there. What happened? So James told the story. Not all of it. Some things were too personal, too raw. But enough. The bar fight. The arrest. The jail, the gang. The shower incident. Coming home. When he finished, Bill spoke up. Sounds like you were trying to do the right thing and got punished for it. That's rough. But you survived it. You stood up for yourself when you had to. And you got out. That's what matters. I just keep thinking about the guys still in there, James said. The ones who don't get out. Who don't have skills to defend themselves. What happens to them? You can't save everyone. another veteran said gently. Trust me, I've tried. You do what you can when you can, but you gotta take care of yourself first. Make sure you're okay before you worry about everyone else. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. Understanding that he wasn't alone. That other people had struggled with similar things. That asking for help wasn't weakness. As people filed out, Bill pulled James aside. You did good in there, both in the jail and here tonight. Takes courage to share like that. You should come back next week. I think I will, James said. Walking to his car, James felt lighter somehow. The past 3 weeks would always be part of his story. The taunting, the confrontation, the fear that he might have to become someone he didn't want to be again. But they were just one chapter, not the whole book. He drove home through the city streets, past the bar where it had all started, past the courthouse, past the jail where men like Rodriguez were still counting down days until their own release. He thought about sending a letter to his former cellmate, maybe putting some money on Rodriguez's commissary account. Small gestures, but they mattered. At a red light, James caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. Same face, same gray-streaked hair, same tired eyes, but maybe a little wiser, a little more at peace with who he'd been and who he was becoming. The light turned green and he drove forward into whatever came next. Not a soldier anymore, not a prisoner, just a man trying to live a good life one day at a time, and for now that was enough.